Martin Croxall broke rules over pregnant people facial expression, BBC says. In other words, she is in a lot of trouble for telling the truth and speaking facts, things that are obviously not allowed on the news. But anyway, the BBC has upheld 20 impartiality complaints over the way presenter Martine Croxall altered a script she was reading live on the BBC News channel, which referred to pregnant people earlier this year. So it's an impartiality, even though she was basically being forced to say a political statement. By saying pregnant people, that is a political statement. It is a left leaning political statement. That's not impartial. That isn't impartial in any way, but anyway. Croxall was introducing an interview about research on groups most at risk during UK heat waves, which quoted a release from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. The presenter changed her script to instead say women. Oh, and the BBC's Executive Complaints Unit said it considered her facial expression as she said this gave the strong impression of expressing a personal view on a controversial matter. Facts aren't personal views. If I say the sky's blue, that's not me expressing a personal view. It's me stating a fact, right? Just as saying when pregnant people, like you mean women. Only women can get pregnant. That's a fact, right? They have ovaries. They have a womb, they have all those things. Me showing off my expert knowledge in vaginas. Yeah, I've even seen one before. But anyway, the presenter said Malcolm Mystery, who was involved in the research, says that the aged pregnant people, women, and those with pre existing health conditions need to take precautions. The ECU said it considered Croxall's facial expression laid it open to the interpretation that it indicated a particular viewpoint and the controversies currently surrounding trans identity, which explicitly is political. The trans identity stuff is explicitly political, right? It is. It's a very, very left leaning. In fact, it's the majority of left wing advocacy nowadays, right? Tranny stuff and migrants. That's the overwhelming majority of it. Like, see how they're like, oh, they're all communists and all that stuff as well. There's barely any of that anymore. It's migrants and cross dressers. That's it. That's it. We're over here all talking about the economy, everybody's bottom line, the cost of living, and all that stuff. And they're like, yeah, that's nice and all, but you need to have 1 million billion stabby people in the country, and this 40-year-old man in a dress should be allowed to get changed in front of your 5-year-old. That's what the left wing have to offer these days. Fantastic. But anyway, it's explicitly political. It is. You're forcing someone to make an explicitly political statement. That is not impartial, right? Facts are not impartial. Like you can't be impartial with a fact. A fact is just a fact. Just that's it. Right? Oh, you need to be impartial. No, you need to lie. You need to lie in favor of left wing politics. That's what she's been in trouble for. Uh, Following Croxall's introduction, Dr. Mystery, an assistant professor in the LSHTM, spoke about the story and referred to pregnant women. The ECU said Croxall's facial expression after she said pregnant people had been variously interpreted by complainants as showing disgust, ridicule, contempt, or exasperation. I'm going to have a little bit of a guess as to the type of people those complainants might have been. Maybe they had a nice dress on, a little 5 o'clock shadow. You know, the people that are very, very well often known to snitch, the people that like to use the power of violence or states or institutions or state violence itself to force you to believe what they want and force you to say the things that they want you to say. Yeah, those people. See, for a bunch of people that are saying, oh, we're very, very anti fascist, they sure do love using state violence against people. Uh, Fascism's fine when it's for me, but anyway, it added that congratulatory messages Miss Croxall later received on social media, together with the critical views expressed in the complaints to the BBC and elsewhere, tended to confirm that the impression of her having expressed a personal view was widely shared across the spectrum of opinion on the issue. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling was among those who praised Croxall at the time, and I believe she is worthy of praise. Right, I like it. I like it when news presenters tell the truth. It's a nice, refreshing change from the norm. The ECU noted that the explanation offered by BBC News management was that Miss Croxall was reacting to scripting, which somewhat clumsily incorporated phrases from the press release accompanying the research, including the aged, which is not the BBC style, and pregnant people, which did not match what Dr. Mystery said in the clip which followed. It explained that giving the strong impression of expressing a personal view on a controversial matter, even if inadvertently, falls short of the BBC's expectations of its presenters and journalists in relation to impartiality. The ECU upheld the complaints. The finding was reported to management of BBC News and discussed with Miss Coxall and the editorial team concerned. In 2022, the BBC said comments by Croxall made by a News Channel newspaper review soon after Boris Johnson said he would not return to stand as Tory leader breached its rules on impartiality. Her remarks and reactions caused a significant risk the audience could believe opinions were being expressed on the Conservative leadership contest, the BBC said. Correction, the article originally said the ECU found that Maxine Croxall's facial expressions as she spoke expressed a controversial view about trans people. This has been amended to make clear that they instead found that her expression gave the strong impression of expressing a personal view on a controversial matter. The article also mistakenly quoted the judgment as referring to trans ideology and has been amended correctly to refer to trans identity. So it seems that the BBC got a little bit of a complaint about the article as well. But in regards to this, should the BBC and all the news agencies be impartial? Absolutely, yeah, they should. Right? It should be nice. Everybody here's all the facts. Everybody go home and form your own opinions. In an ideal world, yes, that would be lovely. However, it is not the case. Because bear in mind, the BBC is state-owned. It is owned by the government. Therefore, it only gives us the information and opinions that the government wants us to have. Basically, anything that the government owns is only going to work and operate in favour of the government. That's the way it works. That's what happens when the government has monopoly on so many things. That's why the courts, the police, everything, the government will rig things so that it will always rule in its own favour. Right? That's what happens when you have the monopoly on violence and the monopoly on all decision making. That's just the way it is. Right? In an ideal world, all the newspapers, all the news agencies would all be impartial. That'd be lovely. And that's the thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to do the same thing with my own children. I'm going to go, here's all the facts, here's all the information, bugger off and make up your own minds. Right, that's what I'm going to do, because this is the funny thing is, and this is definitely the case with children. I'm going to guess a lot of you have experienced this as well. Any sort of thing that you have sort of been coerced into or misled into, or any beliefs you've been manipulated into or forced into in some instances, the instant you can drop those beliefs, you will. You will. You'll drop them. How many of you had like I'm Christian. My parents weren't really. My parents aren't really Christians, but I know a lot of people who grew up with very, very harsh Christian parents, and the instant they left the house, boom, they dropped every single bit of it. Fuck it, they won't even consider it, won't even talk about it anymore. So in their efforts to turn their child into a Christian, they actually just push them further and further away from the church. Right? And that's because they forced them, they manipulated them, they guilt tripped them, they did all these horrible bad things. Right? If you do horrible bad things to someone to get them to believe an opinion or whatever, the instant they don't have to anymore, they will drop it. Right? Which is why it is so much better to basically give someone all of the information, as much of it as you can, in a fair and unbiased way, and say, go away and make up your own mind. Because there's lots of opinions that lots of you have, and the reason that you've held for like decades probably, and the reason you've held those opinions for decades is because you arrived at those opinions of your own accord. You went out, you considered all the information, you picked what opinion you wanted to have because it's the one that made most sense to you, and you've had that opinion for an extremely long time. Now, also, your opinions might have changed over time, but again, that's because you received new information and you made a conscious decision of your own free will to change that opinion. And those types of opinions are the ones that you will hold on to the most, right? Which is why, whenever you want to get people onto like our side or believe the way you want them to believe, what you should be doing is giving them all of the information that's available and saying, now go fuck off and have a think about it. Right? That is the best way to get people on side. If you start using coercion, manipulation, fucking fudging the facts, hiding information, lying by omission, all of those things, the person's just going to go, you are a manipulative lying bastard, and I don't want anything to do with any of your opinions anymore. Right? That's what's going to happen. That is what happens, especially when you get big news agencies going, we are totally impartial, wank, and everything like that's just what's going to happen. So in an ideal world, all the news agencies would be impartial. Unfortunately, they're not. Least of all the BBC. They're an arm of the state. Right? They work for the government. But still, a newscaster presenting it, but basically, this wasn't her presenting a personal opinion. The fact that only women, i.e., adult, biological adult human females, can get pregnant is just a fact. That's not a personal opinion. It is a fucking fact.